Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking about journalism and education with Jim Lehrer. Jim is executive editor of the PBS NewsHour. He received his AA degree from Victoria College in Texas and his bachelor's in journalism from the University of Missouri before joining the Marine Corps, reporting for the Dallas Times-Herald, co-anchoring the McNeil-Lehrer Report, and moderating 12 presidential debates. Jim is author of 20 novels and is a proud collector of bus memorabilia. Welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Delighted to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you, Jim. And if you wouldn't mind saying a word or two about bus memorabilia. We've never had anybody on the show who's collected bus memorabilia before.
Well, there are only about 3 of us in the world who do it. It's a personal thing, Steve. I grew up in the bus business. My dad spent most of his adult life in the bus business. When I was going to that Victoria College, a little junior college in South Texas, I worked as a ticket agent at the Trailways Bus Depot, and I am a bus person. And as a consequence, years ago, I started collecting things like cap badges that drivers, wore in their hats, and old bus depot signs, and toy buses, and all that sort of stuff. And I can say with absolute certainty and pride that I am one of the leading collectors of bus memorabilia in the country. And it's easy to be such a thing because, as I say, there are only about 3 of us.
Well, we're delighted that you're one of those 3, and you're here in the studio today.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, when you started at Victoria College, could you say a word or two about why you went to Victoria College and what that was like? Because we have a lot of people who are interested in your early years in terms of what,
Sure.
What did you do early on that helped you with your career?
Well, I say, first of all, I was every step along the way in my education, end quote, back to public schools in Kansas and in Texas, et cetera, through junior college and through Missouri. I always had somebody who came along to help me. There was a teacher, a dean, somebody who cared enough to give me a little push, to give me a little assistance. At Victoria College, I graduated from high school in San Antonio, and my brother, who's 2 years older than I, was already going to the University of Texas, and that's where I was supposed to go, the University. We didn't have the money for both of us to go to college at the same time, a 4-year college. So we moved to Victoria because my dad had a job in Victoria, which is a town about 100 miles southeast of San Antonio on the way to Houston. And but I wanted to go ahead and go to college. And my dad said, hey, I think there's a junior college there. So I go there, and there's one building, and it's called Victoria College. And I walked in there, and I said, I'd like to go to school there. And this wonderful woman behind the counter said, well, fine, what do you want to study? And I said, well, what do you got, kind of thing. I said, eventually I want to go to journalism school. I want to go eventually to a 4-year school, but I just can't afford to do that now. And I said, what would it cost? And she said, $40. I said, I don't have $40. My dad had given me all I had was a $10 bill. I said, all I've got is $10. She said, that's fine. So anyhow, I started taking a full load, so to speak. I mean, I had, I guess you'd call it in college terms, 15 hours. In other words, 5 3-hour courses. And working in the bus depot, went to work immediately in the bus depot at night. And there were only 300 students in the school, very small. I decided, I'd already knew by then that I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a writer. I found the faculty advisor to the newspaper, and went over to him and I said, hey, look, I'd like to work on the newspaper. And the guy, I'll never forget this guy, he stands up. He's a professor of all kinds of things. Now he stands up, because at junior colleges, you're a professor of all kinds of things, not just one thing. He stands up and he reaches across, shakes my hand and says, congratulations, you're now the editor of the paper. Nobody else had ever just come and volunteered like that. So anyhow, I was the editor of the paper. Only came out about maybe once a month or so, but I wrote everything. I wrote every headline. I did everything. It was a wonderful education for me. I was also had a full load, and I was also a class load, and I was also working in the bus depot. And the combination of those 3 things, was where the 2 years I did that were monumental in my life. because I was, from the moment I woke up in the morning, and I woke up very early, till the moment I went to bed at night, and that was very late because I worked till 11 o'clock or midnight at the bus depot, I was busy. And I was busy doing things that mattered to me, and I saw as part of what could lead to whatever my future was. And one quick story about how important the junior college experience was for me. Beyond all of that, when it got toward the end of would have been my sophomore year, and I was trying to decide now where I'm going to go for the next 2 years. And they had an old typewriter in the bus depot, and I wrote out letters to 35 universities. They were all state universities. I didn't know about these big fancy private schools at that point. And I decided on the University of Missouri because of its great journalism reputation and all of that. And I'd never been to Missouri. I'd never been to Columbia, Missouri, or the University of Missouri. But at any rate, get to the point. I wrote a letter, applied, got a letter back from somebody in the admissions department of Missouri, said, hey, forget it. We've never heard of your school. There's no way in the world we're going to accept you, your credits, or accept you as a junior, which is what I wanted to be, which is what I would have been. And so I took the letter to the guy who was the dean, the guy who ran our little college, and he was a big old football player, and it really made him mad, you know, for these guys in Missouri. Who do they think they are? So anyhow, he said, Jimmy, do you really want to go to Missouri? And I said, yes, Dean, I really want to go to Missouri. He said, are you ready to roll the dice with me? And I said, what do you mean? He said, okay, I'm going to write a letter to these Wawas, and I'm going to say, hey, this kid can do the work. You send some exams down here. We'll administer them under any rules you want if he passes them on the condition you'll admit him as a junior. And lo and behold, and then some anonymous guy in the admissions department says, you're on. And so on one Saturday, Sunday, I did all these tests. Not only did I pass it, I aced them so much they admitted me as an advanced junior. Can you imagine what a difference that made in my life? Otherwise, I would have been a, quote, what they called he's the guy at Missouri had originally said, you would be a probationary sophomore. So that, I mean, it would have set me back. In other words, my education at Victoria would have meant nothing. That's what it boiled down to. Anyhow, it's a long answer, Steve. I'm sorry, but what it did, it got me into Missouri, and I did get a great journalism education. And without that, who knows what might have happened? And it's all because of this dean and the people in that small school.
Well, I think that's a fair point, but it's also about the admissions officer at Missouri who recognized that there may be some potential there, even though he or she didn't really know much about Victoria College.
Absolutely, absolutely right. But you know, the other point of this, and this is something that you know more about than I do, but I follow this because of my background, is that it was a wonderful place for me to go. I couldn't afford to go to the four-year school. But they knew, the professors at people who ran it and the professors at Victoria knew I wanted to go on to school, you see. So they helped me. You know, the English teacher, or the science teacher, or the math, they all knew that I was there for 2 years to get ready to go to a four-year institution. And I've always believed that for those kids who cannot afford initially to go to school, as I said, I know there are all kinds of reasons to have community colleges, and they have tremendous, that's what they call them now. Back then they called them junior colleges. They quit calling them junior colleges because it sounded bad, you know, it sounded second rate. But it is another function, legitimate, serious function of junior colleges or community colleges for kids who want to go on to school. It can be a big step forward. And while you see, I worked, 8 hours a day while I was doing that. Small classes, they cared about me, and it helped me later on. And that would be true of anybody today who wanted to go to a community college, I hope.
Well, I think that's fair, but let's compare that to some of the elite schools that and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know that your kids went to some very nice colleges, a generation obviously after you did. What do you think about kids today who have the opportunity to go to community college, but then choose to go to the fancier schools?
Well, every story in every situation is different. It is. It's not. This is not. It's not the way. There is not one way. One way to go. And I think some kids who went to who go first to elite schools might be better off by starting at a community college. Some of these kids, for instance, get out of high school without really having learned, how to study, how to read, how to write a theme, what they used to call themes, how to write a paper is what they call them now. All those kinds of things, if you learned it, if you could, junior college would be if you got the right one, and it was geared that way, and some of these community colleges are now doing this more. I just read a story about this, a news story about this, where some of these juniors realize they can become prep schools in a way for some of these kids because a lot of these kids think they can get into an elite school, and then they don't do well because they're not ready. And for the kid, but for the other, but as I say, there's no one thing fits all.
When you mentioned mentors, you had a mentor, if I'm not mistaken, a big mentor in high school. I know you had, you just mentioned that you had some mentors at Victoria College. How did you mentor students at the NewsHour? Or was there a mentoring process at the news, or is there a mentoring process at the NewsHour?
There is a built-in mentoring process into the process of the NewsHour. There's no way to do live, any major journalism, particularly daily journalism, but particularly television journalism, without there being a lot of people involved. As I tell people all the time, it takes 18 people just for me to say good evening and get it on the air in a way that in color so people can see and hear it. It just involves a lot of folks doing their jobs properly at the same time, where it's not, all it takes is one little thing to go wrong. Mentoring, example. We have on the NewsHour, we've had since day one. We started 38 years ago. We've always had either an internship program or what was now called a desk assistant program. These are kids who come right out of college. They can be older, but they don't all have to be kids. But these are people who they get the minimum wage, and they work for us for 6 months, and they rotate among our various things: editing, the clean editorial side, the technical side, the research, whatever it is. Excuse me. Administrative side. So all of these things, the moving around is a form of education. In terms of my personal mentoring, I'll tell you a story. We were in a studio like this, ready to go on the air for the NewsHour one night, and this was back when it was the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, and I was sitting there by myself. It was before we had computers sitting right there by me at the table. And there was a kid, a desk assistant, who was assigned, as there was for everybody, for every day, to kind of hustle the script for me. And so the kid was hustling the script. About that moment, I heard in my ear, about 3 minutes before airtime, stories just moved on the wires, and the newsroom was on the floor above us from where the studio was, and somebody, the executive producer, somebody said, story just moved. It was a news development on a story that we were going to report on. So I said to the kid who's fooling with the copy, I said, look, go get me the copy of the script, and I need it now because I'm about to go on the air. And he said, well, I don't think I can make it by then. I said, oh, you don't think you can get up there, get it, and come back here by then? He said, no. I said, I'll tell you what, don't worry about it. I said, when 6 o'clock Eastern time comes, it's going to be now, it's probably less than 2 minutes as the clock runs. And if we're not ready at 6 o'clock, I'll just look out at the camera and say, good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. I'm not quite ready yet. Go ahead and have a drink or something. We'll play music. And this kid, of course, turned purple, red. He said, oh, fine, I'll get it, Mr. Lehrer. Chunk. And within 10 seconds, it seemed to me, he was back. And that was what I call mentoring. And in terms of, that's how you learn. And I always I had always met with every one of our little classes of interns and whatever when we started. I said, look, you get out of this what you want, and you learn what you want to learn. And the important thing is pay attention to what's going on, and for God's sake, ask questions. These are nice people working here. We don't hire bad people. We have a good person rule in our organization. Feel free to ask them questions, including me. Just don't ask me while I'm on the air or whatever. But if you want to know why something was done, why did you do that story? Why did you do this story instead of that story? Why did you ask this question instead of that question, whatever? Hey, be my guest. And for the most part, I mean, it's scary for these kids. There's no question about it. Oh my God, I don't want to go and ask them, but they do. And there's no mentoring program. To answer your question directly, there's no mentoring program directly that you would call mentoring, but the whole system is based on that.
Well, what about the military? You wrote for, I believe it's called the Boot.
That's right.
Excuse me. There was the Boot at when you were in the Marines. How did that help you?
Well, the whole Marine experience, I was in the Marine Corps for 3 years in the 1950s. I was in the infantry. I was a platoon commander, and for the most part. And it was at a time I had no choice. Their draft was in the 1950s. It was between the end of the Korean War and the beginning of the Vietnam War. So I fired no rounds in anger at anybody, and nobody fired any at me. I was strictly a Cold War Marine. But the experience of having to depend on others, and for them to depend on me, to realize the responsibility we all have. The first thing they tell you in the Marine, first two things they tell you in the Marine Corps. There's nothing more useless than a dead Marine. And if you want to stay alive, Marine, you take care of the Marine on your right and the Marine on your left, and he will take care of you. And if you don't do that, buddy, you're not going to last. And so suddenly, just by telling you this, it doesn't really matter who the guy on your right is, what he looks like, what the color of his skin is, how smart he is, or whatever how big he is, how tough he is. It doesn't mean squat. What it means is I'm dependent on him, and he's dependent on me. And those kinds of relationships that I developed in those 3 years in the Marine Corps, and also the Marines have this attitude, which is the difficult will be done immediately, the impossible will take a little longer. I mean, somebody tells you to do something, your first reaction is, do it. Not to come up with all the things, whatever. Now, from a working standpoint, later, as a journalist, my thing with the Boot, the only reason, I only did that for about 4 or 5 months. I'd come back from the infantry, the 9th Marines, the 9th Infantry Regiment in the Far East, came back to Parris Island, had 6 months before I got out of the Marine Corps, and unfortunately when I reported for duty at Parris Island, the colonel looks at my thing and he says, I see you have a journalism degree. Hey, and they had problems because some recruits had died in training at Parris Island a couple of years before, and Marines were very careful about their PR. He said, yeah, that's what no. I said, no, I'm going to do that for the rest of my life. Colonel, sir. And I don't want to do newspaper work. I'm going to do that then. I'm going to help. I wanted to be a serial officer, which is take the recruits through training. And the colonel says, I guess you didn't hear me, did you? So anyhow, I was the officer in charge of the paper, and which meant basically drinking mostly at night, and then helping people write the stories. They enlisted men who were professional journalists, and then taking the paper down to Savannah and getting it published and all that. It was that part of the Marine experience was kind of a dessert to the learning part, the serious part that I had, which I've got to tell you, Steve, was like what happened to me at Victoria College. That's why I'm so fortunate, is I've had help, and the Marines helped because I was a punk. I mean, I was wearing white buck shoes, and I had never been on an airplane when I went to join the Marines, and I got on an airplane in San Antonio, went to Washington and Quantico for training, which is boot camp, officers training school, which is like boot camp for officers, and I mean, it was hell. And I thought, what the hell am I doing here? It was really, really, but the Marines taught me all kinds of things about myself that I didn't know. In other words, physically, I could do things that I just found. When I first had to go hand over a steel cable, my head like this, my legs over the cable, over a wide river with a full pack helmet and rifle. Falling, if I fell, I was going to fall not only a long way, but into the water in front of all of my fellow Marines. When I first, they said, okay. I said to myself, there's no way in hell I can do this. Well, I did it because I had no choice. And I learned to be, I am a qualified expert in hand-to-hand combat. Now, I had never done anything like that before in my life. And I was an expert rifleman, and an expert with a .45, and an expert with a Browning automatic rifle, which is a machine gun. I never held a weapon, much less fired a weapon, until I joined the Marines. All of those things that I learned to do got into my head forever that there's nothing I can't do. And all of these things, as I say, I've been so fortunate to have these experiences at a time when I needed them to take me the next step here, and gone.
Well, that strength of character that you built through that perhaps really helped you when you met the Shah, when you met all the political leaders, and you did all the interviews you did.
Well, it did in one way, Steve. I realized that because I was in the Marines, even though I was not combat, I had proven myself to myself. In other words, I knew what I could do. I knew what my limits were. I knew what my strengths were. I knew how tough I was. So I didn't have to do it on television. I didn't have to prove on television how tough I am, like beating up on some. It's so easy to beat up on somebody on television. I have zero tolerance for my colleagues who bring people on television and then beat up on them. You know, McNeil used to say, and he and I agreed 100%, that's why we're still close friends and partners and all of this, is somebody comes on your television program, he or she comes as your guest, and you treat them that way. And yes, you can ask tough questions, but that's different. A tough question is a content issue. To be tough on somebody, to be rough, show, that is an ego issue. You're showing how tough you are, how tough. When I get through running even talking about a debate even, somebody says, oh, well, you did a great job, asked a really, really good question. It's not about the questions. It's not about the conduct of the moderator or of the interviewer. The point is always the person who is doing the debating or the person who is being interviewed. That's what it's all about. It isn't the person who's actually doing it. And that's one of the good things I'd learned, and it's just inbred in me as a result of my Marine experience. Because in the Marine Corps, somebody who wants to be a showboat, you're in an infantry platoon, and you got 42 guys, and one of them wants to be a show-off, that guy is doomed. I mean, doomed in ways that he's not going to. He may not make it alive, but even on another line, he may not make it as a Marine because we're all together. The strength comes in being together and being low key and being kind of invisible as part of a team.
Well, as someone who's a relatively new host compared to you, one of the things that I struggle with is how to ask pressing questions without being rude.
Yeah, that's it. It's very easy to do. At least I think it's easy to do. First of all, think not in terms of questions, but think in terms of subjects. And you're having a discussion. You're not having a grilling. This is not a courtroom. You're not a prosecutor or a defense lawyer or whatever. Okay. I'm interviewing you. Okay. You're an expert on higher education admissions. I want to talk to you. I want to interview you about. I'm interested in the SAT, the value of the SAT test. Okay. Now, there are two ways of doing that. One of them is sit and write 50 questions about, okay, well, the SAT, is it really this? It's really, so Billy Bob says this about SAT, what's your response to that? The kind of thing is. Or, if your attitude is, okay, I'm going to interview Steve for 15 minutes, whatever, about the SAT, okay. And you don't say it, but you do it with your body language. Okay, let's talk about this now. What's the problem with SATs? What do you think the problem is? In other words, you don't tell him what he's supposed to know. You ask him. And then, oh, is that right? You've already done but if you've done your homework, then you listen. The number one thing for an interviewer is to do his or her homework. Not so you can ask gotcha questions, so you can listen to the answers. You'll be relaxed enough. My thing, and I've mentioned this all the time to people, you know, my favorite kind of made-up example is, I'm interviewing a senator, and I say, Senator, do you think we should sell more grain to Cuba? Yes, Jim, I think we should sell more grain to Cuba, but before we do that, we should bomb Havana. And I say, what kind of grain, Senator? Because that was my next question. That was the question I had written down. And so as a consequence, the answer went right by me. And if you do your homework designed to make you relaxed enough, and that is not easy. This is easy to say, but it's not. When you're doing, particularly you're doing what you're doing. We're taping this, but you're taping the time here. That means you want to get it right the first time, because there's going to be a second time or a third time, and it's particularly true of live television. So there's a tremendous pressure on you to begin with already, and you want to take that pressure off. The way you take the pressure off of you is by knowing the subject cold, so you can engage. Oh, is that right? Oh, well, the report on the SATs, the one, that was in '86. But yeah, I was saying, have you read that statement? Yeah, do you agree? You see, and in the process, and you say, no, I haven't read that. Well, that's a harsh thing, maybe, but it was asked. It flowed, not as a gotcha question, but as a natural flow of information in the interview.
Well, as someone, Jim, who is an expert in natural flows, we're going to have to say goodbye.
Okay.
You have flowed brilliantly throughout your career. We thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Steve.
If you would like additional information about Jim Lehrer, please visit pbs.org/newshour or mcneillehrer.com. If you have comments or suggestions about higher education today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.